Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Out of the Fog. Well, over the next 30 minutes, you're going to hear the personal story of transition from trans activist Dane Woodland, a young man who was born female, but as you're about to hear, started transitioning without even realizing it was happening in his late teens and early 20s. As he says, it happened right under my nose. Now tonight, Dane is going to join me in studio to explain what gender dysphoria is and why he decided to share his story publicly with all of you here tonight on Out of the Fog. Plus, Dane's mom, Wendy Woodland, joins in on the conversation to talk about her reaction and acceptance as she said goodbye to her daughter and welcomed a son. Plus, we hear about the gap for parents when it comes to education and support, as the only place that Wendy knew where to turn to for help was the internet. We're going to take a very short break right now and hear a word from our sponsors, but stay right there as my interview with Dane Woodland is coming up in just 1 minute. We'll be right back.
I got your back, big guy. Join us in our mission to help protect backs at work.
Help! Help!
Somebody call 911.
He's not breathing.
Please, anybody.
Does anybody know first aid?
Son, I'm a paramedic. We need to know what you're allergic to.
Ma'am, can you tell me where you live?
Sir, have you been taking heart medication?
Do you have any allergies we should know about?
Can you tell me who to call?
If you're unconscious, you can't answer the simple questions that could save your life.
Great. He's wearing medic alert. Noah, everything's gonna be okay.
Medic alert. Speaks for you when you can't.
Welcome back to Out of the Fog. Well, before the break, we told you a little bit about trans activist Dane Woodland, a young man who's been open about his story of transitioning from female to male. And Dane joins me now in studio to share his story with you here tonight on Out of the Fog. Welcome. Great to have you. Great to have you here in the studio.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So you started your transition in 2014. Yeah. And, you know, as I just alluded to, you've been very open about it and sharing your story and on social media. Yep. I know your Instagram account, there's a picture there of the, I guess, before and after of your top surgery. I'm just wondering, why exactly did you want to share your story publicly?
Well, I think it all kind of started with my recognition of the fact that there were some rights that we needed to kind of work on as a community. And I noticed as well that I'm very fortunate, you know, to have the rights and freedoms that I do have, although they need to be improved. They exist because people who came before me, who were kind of the trailblazers, who were willing to step up and you know, open up conversations about the issues that we're facing. So, you know, knowing that I have that comfort and familiarity with, you know, communicating with people and was willing to be open about it, I felt like, you know, it was kind of like my responsibility almost to kind of get out there. You know, it's kind of betterment for myself, for other people like me, and people who are trying to understand us as well. So I felt like that was a really important thing for me to do.
In terms of understanding, tell us, you know, what is gender dysphoria? Explain that for us.
So gender dysphoria, you know, quite often people refer to it in simple terms as this kind of idea of being born in the wrong body. But I think it goes a little bit, you know, deeper than that, because that kind of insinuates that there is something wrong. The idea is more or less that socially, you know, the body that we have doesn't necessarily reflect who we are or who we feel that we want to be. And so it's kind of that incongruence and that discomfort within yourself, and that sense that other people around you are aware of that discomfort and that you're limited by that discomfort that you have within yourself. So gender dysphoria is kind of like this constant tick, you know, that you're facing, and it can be really devastating. It can lead to, you know, not going to work, not getting out of bed, not going to school, not leaving your house, depression, anxiety. There's a great risk of suicide as well with transgender people. So really, it is something that is so pervasive and can influence, you know, every aspect of your life, which is why it's so important, you know, that we create some awareness around this issue and start to have effective methods of treatment so that people can be more comfortable and be themselves and go out and, you know, do the things that they are capable of doing.
I want to go back a number of years. you actually said that you came out twice, shall we say.
Yeah.
So explain that for us in terms of, I guess, the last number of years and leading up to 2014.
So, you know, growing up, I kind of always knew that there was something a little bit different, I guess, about myself, but I couldn't really quite put my finger on it. I did struggle with mental health issues, you know, starting around puberty, and as I was growing up, I remember, you know, trying to point the finger, you know, maybe it's this, or maybe it's my family, you know, church, or maybe it's school, or, you know, something like that, and I couldn't, nothing was ever really satisfying as a solution, you know, to my issues. And when I first went to university, of course, my horizons were broadened, and I was exposed to lots of different lifestyles. And at the time, I entered what was my first same-sex relationship. So I came home, I came out as a lesbian at 19, and that did relieve me in one sense, because it kind of allowed me to, you know, get off of that kind of set path that was designated for me. But I still don't think it was enough, and I still don't think it was 100% accurate in terms of who I was. So, you know, kind of right under my nose, I started transitioning. And when I say that, I mean that I started to kind of become more masculine. So I had really long hair, cut it off. My wardrobe kind of changed over time. My makeup was only for special occasions, then not at all. And it got to the point that people around me were starting to wonder, you know, what is going on? The way that you're presenting yourself is so different now. And
so were they asking questions?
Yeah, they were, and you know, I was really bothered by that. I had no idea, honestly, what it meant to be transgender, and I was really terrified that that could possibly be me. I was in denial of it for a really long time, tried to rationalize it, you know, as body image issues and lots of other things. And it got to the point that in 2014, before I came out, I went to this picnic at St. John's Pride. They had a transgender picnic. And I remember going there thinking, you know, I'm not going to fit in with these people. I don't know what to talk about. And I thought everyone was going to be super weird, which is, you know, I regret that I ever felt that way. But I was really afraid. And when I got there, everyone that I met was just like everybody else. You know, they had ambitions and friends and families and careers, and they had dreams, and you know, they were just like everybody else. They were just normal people. And in seeing that, I was no longer afraid to be transgender, and I started to accept myself, and that was when I moved forward and came out a second time, because you know, it was so fun the first time. I had to do it twice, but came out again. Started my hormones in August of 2014, and have been moving forward with it since then.
I want to touch on something that you talked about in terms of, you know, it was obviously hard for you internally to process this happening. And just on, you know, on a personal note, I have a very my best friend who is a gay male, but during his time of accepting that he's gay, as you know, he was, you know, a teenager, he was in denial and almost didn't want to be. So how hard is that in terms of being, I guess, a personal struggle within yourself?
It is very difficult. I think a lot of times when we think about coming out, we think about how that affects our social sphere and everybody around us, but there is also this process of coming out to yourself. And that journey can be quite challenging, and for me, it certainly was, especially because I didn't really have the understanding to recognize what was going on. So I really had to navigate that, you know, completely on my own. I didn't have a lot of support or understanding because there is such a lack of awareness, you know, around transgender people, but I was really challenged by it. And like I said, you know, I went through everything, you know, imaginable, thinking like, maybe if I just like lose some weight, I'll like my body better, or maybe if I, you know, wear my hair differently, I'll like it better, or maybe if I do this. And, you know, as I started to change the way that I presented myself, I realized I was more and more and more happy, and that was terrifying, because I was recognizing, you know, what I was getting myself into, and I was almost afraid that I was going to commit to that, and that I was going to like it, but I was really afraid of what kind of the repercussions were going to be as well. So it was really something that, quite similar to your friend, you know, I was kind of in denial for a long time until I finally, it became undeniable. I often tell people that the idea of me being transgender kind of started as a little whisper, and at the end of it is like someone standing next to me with a megaphone. It's like, you are transgender, you know, like, you got to accept it. So it became undeniable.
Since you've transitioned, you've become a feminist. So how you know, just tell me about that, because it has really opened your eyes into a whole other light.
Yeah, it's a really interesting experience how that kind of grew in tandem with me becoming more masculine. You know, you probably wouldn't expect it to kind of go that way. But I just noticed that my life got so different. And, you know, I'm the same person, and I feel like I'm the same person, probably a much more confident version of myself. But just noticing little day-to-day subtle things with the way that people relate to me. And as a woman, I had kind of almost like accepted those things and kind of felt like that was the norm. And then all of a sudden, you know, when things started to become so different, I really recognized, you know, how much of a disparity still exists. You know, prior to my transition, I had only ever really focused on kind of like the big political issues, you know, like abortion and like right to vote and education and jobs and wages and stuff like that. And I felt like, you know, I mean, we have come a long way. And I was like, gee, you know, I don't know what the big deal is. Everything's fine. But then, you know, it's just the little things, you know. I'm not a sweetheart anymore. You know, I'm a buddy. Or like, if someone wants something moved, you know, we look at the guys to move things. And my knowledge in the gym as a personal trainer, you know, which is my day job, that's suddenly more respected because I'm a guy now. My credentials didn't change, but suddenly, you know, just the fact that I'm asserting myself as a male makes my opinion more valuable. So when I started seeing these things happen almost every single day, I was like, wow, you know, there are still a lot of issues. So that was what really kind of grew my feminism, because I just couldn't believe how different people were treating me.
You recently gave a speech. You addressed TED Talk youth. You took part in that, as did a number of youth across our community. And that, a lot of that was in this talk. What was the message that you wanted to get across?
I think I really wanted to talk about the subtle ways that we are sexist, because like I said, you know, there are a lot of people I think who are similar to myself who only see kind of like the big issues that we talk about and don't recognize the little things that we do, and how the ways that we can relate to people can really, you know, put a damper on their day, and more so than that, like be really harmful and limiting as well. I think the message that I wanted to get across is to really just be considerate of other people and their individual experiences, because I think a lot of times we look at things through our own eyes, but we don't consider that somebody else's perspective could shape the way that they understand things differently, and that things that we think are innocuous could be very harmful to others. So that was a big thing, and particularly I think to males, to be more of a role model, because of course we see a lot of women rallying for women's issues. But it's easy to sit by kind of as a bystander. And I often kind of liken it to a lot of conversations we have about bullying, where they say that the bystander is often just as bad as the bully because they're still allowing it to happen. And I think a lot of times we sit comfortably within sexism and we don't challenge it. And we hear people say things that are you know, unfair or harmful, and we just, because it's not affecting us directly, we don't say anything about it. So I think it's really that call to action to challenge that stuff and to become uncomfortable, you know, with those inequalities.
One part of your TEDx Youth Talk, I want to point out, because the last line of your talk, you said, your gender does not define you, you do. That's a very strong statement.
And it's true. I mean, you know, growing up, there were certain things that I just felt like it just wasn't something for a girl to do. And that was what I accepted. You know, just because I was a girl, I couldn't. And I think that that's the case for many people. We see that from a very early age. You know, girls don't play with this, boys don't play with this, girls don't do this, boys don't do this. It's ingrained in you your whole life. And it's amazing to me how that one little part of your identity can be such a huge determinant of everything that you do, you know, what you wear, what you pursue for a career, you know, your pastimes, your hobbies, your interests, like all of that, you know, is predetermined based on, you know, what the doctor said you were when you were born. So I think that it's really important for people to take that, you know, that initiative to be independent with their personalities. I mean, life is so short, and there's so many things that you could do, and to be so limited and held back and be afraid of how people will receive you, I think is such a shame, because, you know, you don't have a lot of time here, and tomorrow's never guaranteed. So I think it's really important to just do what you like, and who cares about everything else, you know?
Okay, a very strong message. Thank you very much. Now, we are, of course, just going to take a very short break. You are going to still be here when we come back, along with your mother. Wendy Woodland is going to be here to talk about the importance of support and education for parents as well, especially when you have a transgender child. Stay with us. We'll be right back with that. Welcome back to Out of the Fog. Well, we are continuing our conversation with trans activist Dane Woodland. And joining us for this half of the show is Wendy Woodland, Dane's mother. Great to have you here in studio.
Hi, Erin.
Hi. So, Dane, I'm going to start with you. When you were, coming out to yourself and to family and friends, were you afraid about, I guess, your mom's reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming out is not easy. I did it twice. Not easy either time. And in particular, I think the second time I was a little bit more nervous than I was the first because awareness of people, and gender diversity and the idea of being trans is much less than the awareness, I think, of being gay or lesbian or bisexual, pansexual, or whatever, sexual orientation you are. So my biggest fear, I think, was just the lack of understanding and the fact that this is not something that we know all that well, and that can be really scary because you don't know what the future is going to hold for that person, and because it is such a big life change as well.
Right. Wendy, can you, I guess, place yourself back in that moment? What kind of came to your mind when Dane was telling you this?
Which time? First question to that. Because in both cases, I was very, very surprised. I mean, I can just say I didn't see it coming in either case. But with the transition of identity, yeah, it was incredibly difficult because immediately you have so many thoughts and concerns that just flash through your mind. I mean, as a parent, you want nothing more than your child to be happy and successful and safe. So immediately it was, okay, first of all, there's a big change in who you are, what your life is going to look like, what I call you, which was a huge adjustment when your whole identity of a parent is to, a young girl that you raise, and then now this has to be something different. Just difficult to try and go through the thought process of everything that is now going to be completely different in your life.
Right. So in terms of even like the pronoun going, obviously, like you said, raising a daughter, but you have a son now.
Absolutely. And that was
an adjustment for a parent.
That was one of the most difficult, actually, and occasionally still slip up because my sole identity as a parent, talk about identity change, my identity as a parent was a parent of a she. And to change the name, while that took a long time as well, kids go by nicknames or change their names. So instead of, saying the birth name to say Dane, while that was hard, to go from he to she, or she to he, was much more difficult, much more difficult.
Yeah. Through all of this, and I guess, after time and just realizing, did you have that feeling of, I essentially have to put my feelings aside and really embrace not a daughter, but a son in terms of moving forward and the future of your relationship as bond as, as mother and son?
It was a lot of difficult days. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and just, smooth it all over and say, well, this is fine. I just want my child to be happy, and this is so that they can have a fulfilled life. Absolutely feel that, but it's gut wrenching. To say that there's no pain and no difficult times and lots of very difficult conversations between Dane and I, because while it was something he felt that he had to do in order to be an authentic person and be true to themselves, for me it was a punch in the gut and a hurt because I was losing somebody that meant so much to me. And I tried to talk about this and keep the emotion out of it, but as a parent, I think sometimes in talking about transitioning, the hurt that a parent feels is often not talked about and addressed because, there is a lot of that. It's a huge change for us as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you, at any point, did you question, yourself as a parent? And sometimes when, no matter what circumstance, when you're watching, your son and your daughter grow up through life and face, personal challenges, like you said, you want the best for them. But do you question yourself in terms of, what you've done to raise your child? Does that enter your brain?
Absolutely. You automatically question yourself and say, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? When did this happen? What should I have done differently? Or what can I do differently? What can I do now to fix this? Because as a parent, we just want to protect our kids. And if we feel that they're going to be in a situation where they could potentially be hurt or marginalized in life, the first thing is, I got to make this better. So all of that, had, all of those feelings, but eventually got to the point where I can't fix this. There's nothing to fix. Really, there's nothing broken because Dane is just being true to who he is as a person, and my role as a parent is to just love my child. That's where it stops for me. Whether, I think at one point I said, look, if you want to be Dane, male, if you want to be a goat or a zebra, I still love you because I'm still your mother.
You both seem like you have a very special bond. And Dane, your head is nodding, you're smiling at your mother. Yeah. What comes across your mind knowing of, about obviously, like you said, there are lots of challenges along the way, but you still have that bond as, as mother and son. So when you look at your mom now and in terms of how much, I guess, you both have grown throughout this, what kind of comes to your mind?
I think, well, like you just said, I think the growth is such an apparent thing for me. You don't have to change unless you're challenged. And I think that we have really, really been strengthened through our adversity. Like, there's definitely times, throughout my upbringing and, in the last couple of years that if you ask me on a given day, how are things with your mom, I'd be like, oh, just like, not good. And she probably would say the same, how are things with your kid? Not great. But we have really grown together, and I think that, despite the challenges that we've had, I'm really grateful for them because they have brought us together. We get to know each other a little bit differently. You get to know how to, resolve conflict, how to communicate effectively with that person. You learn that you can become vulnerable with that person, that you can feel safe to talk about anything, and I really, really cherish that because we do have that freedom and that openness between one another.
And how important is it, and even, in terms of dressing, obviously there's lots of people watching the show, and in terms of the message to get across to people that, Wendy, like you said, nothing's broken. You are who you are, right? It is a change in gender, yeah. But how important is it to have that support of a parent, knowing that they are there through a time like this in your life?
It is so crucial. I mean, for people who are brought up, with their parents or whatever role model they have, that is like your first source of validation, and you learn from a very early age that, to make those people happy, and that, makes you happy as well. So then all of a sudden, when you do something and you anticipate that it's not going to be well received, that can be so difficult, and it can really put a wedge between you and the people around you. And for me, it did for a period of time. And I think that having that support, especially with people being so intimidated, I mean, I speak to youth a lot of the time, and one of the things they ask me, do you have advice for coming out? My parents are probably not going to react well. Can you help me with that? And there's so much fear about that, and I think that, you hear these great stories about children who have these, positive circumstances where they are so well received, and it makes such a big difference. So having that support and understanding it, or even, acknowledging that you're challenged and then taking that opportunity to educate yourself and moving forward with it, I think is so crucial. It literally can change somebody's life.
Wendy, you brought up, you were saying, obviously, there's parts of the discussion around this, even when it comes to parents, that aren't really talked about. Is there enough support there for parents?
Well, I was just going to jump in on this. You talk about support for the person who's transitioning, but the parent is transitioning as well. And support for those parents, if I didn't have, the internet and sources to go to, because of course when this happened, right away it was, I got to get my head in the game. I need to read up about this. But finding organizations and support in the province has proven to be very difficult. There are some organizations who support parents of children who are at a very, very young age, displaying an opposite gender from the one that they are born with, and taking them through that transition, puberty blockers, so that so many different things happen. But for me, it was, I had a 24-year-old daughter who sat on the couch one night and said, "Mom, I'm transitioning, and I'm changing my name, and I'm going to start taking testosterone next week." To have somewhere to go, people to talk to about going through that, very little support in the province, for that age group.
Okay, we just have a short bit of time left, but Dane, I mean, obviously, when you hear your mom talking about the support on a parent's end of things, again, support and awareness is something that this is why you're here talking, and to be able to spread this word and make people aware. So lots of education still needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's people like myself are everywhere, and a lot of times we don't even recognize it. So I don't think there's any kind of social institution that should be without that awareness. It's going to be in schools, it's going to be in places of medicine, it's going to be in sports. It's everywhere. So even if you yourself are not trans, you may very well interact with somebody who is. So it is so important to have that awareness and to be furthering education so that we can all live more comfortably and happily.
Okay, I want to thank you both so much for joining me. Obviously a great conversation, and one I know we could have gone on forever about this. There's so much to talk about, but I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your personal story.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Okay, we are going to take a very short break, but we will be right back. Stay with us.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Welcome back to the show. Well, I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dane and Wendy Woodland, as Dane shared his personal story of transition, and Wendy, who opened up about what the transition meant as a parent. Now, a very informative and educational interview. I'd like to thank them both for coming into the studio and sharing their story with all of you here tonight on Out of the Fog. Well, we have come to the end of the show, but we always love hearing from you. If you have a story to share or would like to comment on a particular interview, you, of course, can call us at 757-9600 or send an email, outofthefog@rci.rogers.com. Good night, everyone.